You won't believe what my HOA tried to pull on me. Imagine waking up one morning to find a fine in your mailbox for breaking a rule that doesn't even exist. That's exactly what happened to me. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. But when I confronted the HOA president, Karen herself, she smugly told me that she could enforce whatever rules she wanted. That's when I knew this wasn't about rules. It was about control. But Karen had no idea who she was messing with. If she wanted to play dirty, I was more than ready to fight back and expose her for the fraud she really was. And let's just say, by the time I was done, Karen wasn't just embarrassed. She was out of power for good. Before we dive into this wild story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to Tailflow, and drop a comment if you've ever had to deal with an out-of-control Karen. I had lived in my neighborhood for 3 years without any major problems. The HOA was always a little annoying, sending out letters about lawn heights and trash cans, but nothing too serious until Karen took over as president. Karen wasn't just an HOA president. She was a dictator in a pantsuit. The moment she got elected, she went power crazy, sending out new regulations, threatening fines, and making it clear that she was the queen of the cul-de-sac. At first, I ignored most of her nonsense. I followed the real rules and kept to myself. But then, one morning, I found a letter taped to my door. Not in my mailbox, taped to my actual door, as if it were some kind of legal summons. I ripped it off and read the bolded words at the top. Notice of violation, $200 fine for non-compliant driveway. I blinked. What? My driveway? I stepped outside, confused. My driveway looked normal. I wasn't blocking the sidewalk. There were no oil stains. My car was parked perfectly within the lines. I read further. Your driveway does not meet HOA aesthetic standards. Please repaint or resurface it within 14 days or face additional penalties. I nearly laughed. What HOA aesthetic standards? There was no mention of anything like that in the HOA rulebook. My driveway was concrete, like everyone else's. In fact, my next-door neighbor's driveway had huge cracks and weeds growing out of it, yet I was the one getting fined. I had a sinking feeling that this wasn't a mistake. This was personal. I knew exactly who to talk to, Karen. I marched down to the HOA office, which was just a tiny building near the community pool. Inside, Karen sat at her desk, smug as ever. She didn't even look surprised when I walked in, fine in hand. She said, smirking. You got my notice. Yeah, and I'd love to know what rule I supposedly broke, I said, holding up the letter. She folded her hands and leaned back, oozing self-importance. It's simple. Your driveway doesn't meet community standards. I raised an eyebrow. What community standards? Karen waved a hand. We're implementing new guidelines to improve the neighborhood's curb appeal. We want all driveways to have a uniform, refreshed look. Yours is outdated. I was stunned. Karen, my driveway is fine. It's the same as it's always been. She gave me that condescending smile that HOA Karens specialize in. Well, some of us care about property values. That's when I knew. She wasn't just making up rules, she was targeting me specifically. But what Karen didn't know, I wasn't going to just roll over and pay. If she wanted a fight, she was about to get one. I left the HOA office fuming. Karen was full of it. I wasn't just going to accept this ridiculous fine. I was going to fight back. But first, I needed proof. That night, I pulled out the official HOA handbook, the same one they had mailed me when I moved in. I flipped through every single page, looking for anything about driveway aesthetic standards. Nothing. No mention of resurfacing, repainting, or any community standards about driveways. In fact, the only rule about driveways was that they had to be kept clear of debris and vehicles couldn't block the sidewalk. That was it. Karen had literally made up a rule. I knew that if I went back and confronted her, she'd just brush me off. So I needed something bigger, something that would not only prove she was lying, but also expose her in front of the entire HOA. And I had a feeling I knew where to start. Later that evening, as I was walking back home, I noticed Karen standing in her front yard, chatting with a guy in a construction uniform. I slowed down. Something fell off. She was smiling, talking to him like they were old friends. The guy was holding a clipboard and pointing at houses, almost like he was surveying them. Then I saw it. The name on his truck, elite paving and resurfacing. No freaking way. Suddenly, it all clicked. Karen wasn't enforcing community standards. She was trying to drum up business for her buddy's paving company. I needed proof, and I knew exactly how to get it. That night, I went full detective mode. I started digging into HOA records, checking for recent payments and vendor contracts. Most of this info was supposed to be public to HOA members, but Karen clearly wasn't expecting anyone to actually check. And then I found the smoking gun. A proposal dated just 2 weeks before my fine, where Karen recommended hiring elite paving and resurfacing for driveway improvement projects in the neighborhood. Not only that, but the HOA had already approved a deal with them to offer discounted resurfacing jobs to homeowners with Karen's signature at the bottom. Bingo. Karen wasn't just making up rules. She was scamming the neighborhood, trying to force people to pay for resurfacing so her friend's company could profit. And now, I had her. Armed with my smoking gun evidence, I knew I had to expose Karen publicly. And what better way than at the next HOA meeting? The meetings were held once a month in the community center, and let's just say attendance had dropped significantly since Karen became president. People hated dealing with her endless rule changes and power trips. But this time, I was going to make sure everyone showed up. I spent the next few days talking to my neighbors, the same ones who hadn't been fined even though their driveways were way worse than mine. I told them everything, the fake fine, the contract with elite paving, and how Karen was trying to force homeowners into paying for unnecessary resurfacing. People were furious, and rightfully so. "We need to get her out," one neighbor said. "This is fraud," another muttered. "She's been making up rules for months. Who knows what else she's hiding?" By the time the HOA meeting rolled around, word had spread like wildfire. The night of the meeting, I walked into the community center, and nearly every seat was filled. Even people who never attended HOA meetings had shown up. Karen, sitting at the front table, looked surprised. She clearly hadn't expected this kind of turnout. She cleared her throat and gave her usual fake smile. "All right, let's begin. First item on the agenda." I stood up. "Actually, Karen, I have something to address first." Her smile faltered. "We have a schedule to follow." I held up the fine she gave me. I was fined $200 for a driveway rule that doesn't exist. A few people in the crowd murmured. Karen waved a hand dismissively. "We're implementing new aesthetic standards for the neighborhood." I nodded. "Right. Except there's nothing in the HOA rulebook about driveways needing resurfacing." I checked. More murmuring. People were listening now. Karen's smile twitched. "We're working on updating the guidelines." I took a step forward. "So you admit the rule doesn't exist?" Her eyes narrowed. "The board has the right to introduce new policies." I cut her off. "That's interesting because I also found this." I pulled out the contract from Elite Paving and Resurfacing and held it up for the room to see. "This is a proposal for driveway resurfacing," I said loudly, approved before any fines were even issued. "And guess whose signature is at the bottom?" I turned the document around and pointed at Karen's big, bold signature. The room went dead silent. Then the outrage began. "You've got to be kidding me. She was scamming us. This is fraud." Karen's face turned bright red. She shuffled through her papers, trying to come up with some excuse. "This is being taken out of context." I didn't let her off the hook. "Not only did you make up a rule, but you tried to force homeowners into paying for resurfacing so your friend's company could profit. You were planning to fine us into compliance just to make a quick buck." At this point, Karen had completely lost control of the room. People were shouting, demanding answers. "We should vote her out," someone yelled. "This is corruption," another person shouted. Karen tried to speak, but nobody was listening. She was drowning in the backlash. Then the HOA treasurer stood up. "I had no idea about this contract," he said firmly. "This is not how we do things." He looked around the room. I motioned for an immediate vote to remove Karen as HOA president. The room erupted in agreement. Karen's face was priceless. She had lost. The vote happened on the spot, and within minutes, Karen was officially removed from her position. Not only was she kicked off the board, but the new HOA president revoked all the fines she had issued. As for Karen, well, she moved out a few months later. Guess she couldn't handle living in a neighborhood where she wasn't in charge. And me? I kept my driveway exactly the way it was. After Karen was voted out in disgrace, the entire neighborhood felt different. It was as if a storm had finally passed, and we were stepping into the sunlight for the first time. But even though Karen was out, her mess still had to be cleaned up. And let me tell you, she left behind a disaster. The new HOA president, Mr. Callahan, wasted no time reversing the damage Karen had done. The first thing he did? Cancel every single fake fine she had issued. Homeowners who had already paid fines were fully refunded. The driveway resurfacing scam, gone. The contract with Elite Paving and Resurfacing was terminated immediately. And as for the neighbors who had been scared into paying for resurfacing, they were livid. I paid over $1,000 for this. One guy raged. She should have to pay us back. Another neighbor fumed. And that's when things got even worse for Karen. The HOA board decided to launch an internal investigation into Karen's actions, and what they found was even worse than we thought. Turns out, Elite Paving and Resurfacing wasn't just some random company Karen happened to know. The owner was her cousin. That's right, she had been trying to funnel HOA money into her own family's business. When this came to light, the HOA board voted to ban Karen from ever serving on the HOA again. But they weren't the only ones coming after her. Several homeowners who had paid for driveway resurfacing decided to take legal action against Karen and her cousin's company. A few even threatened a small claims lawsuit, arguing that they had been misled and forced into unnecessary payments. And as if that wasn't enough, the HOA formally reported Karen's actions to the state's Homeowner Association Regulatory Board. That meant that not only was she banned from our HOA, but she was now on a watch list, making it nearly impossible for her to ever serve on another HOA again. After everything blew up in her face, Karen completely disappeared from neighborhood events. No more walking around like she owned the place. No more snarky letters in our mailboxes. Then, one day, a moving truck showed up in front of her house. She was gone within a week. Word around the neighborhood was that she had sold her house below market value just to get out as fast as possible. And honestly, good riddance. With Karen out, the HOA finally started functioning like a normal homeowners association. No more random rule changes. No more fake fines. No more power trips. Instead, the board focused on actual improvements, like fixing the community pool and adding new streetlights. People actually started attending HOA meetings again. And the best part? My driveway? Still exactly the same. Even though Karen was officially out, her legacy of pettiness and entitlement still lingered, at least for a little while. Because before she fully disappeared from the neighborhood, I had one last run-in with her. And let's just say, it was as dramatic as you'd expect. A few days before she officially moved out, I was outside watering my front lawn when I saw Karen storming toward me. She had that look, you know, the one. The arms crossed, scowling, I'm about to look. Are you happy now? She snapped. I turned off my hose and raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? You ruined my reputation, she spat. You had no right to turn the HOA against me. I let out a small laugh. Karen, you did that all on your own. You scammed people. You made up rules just to make money. What did you expect? She huffed and shook her head. This neighborhood was falling apart before I took charge. I was the only one who actually cared about keeping it in order. I gestured toward the houses around us. You mean by fining people for no reason and forcing them to pay your cousin for work they didn't need? She turned red. Really red. But I wasn't done. Face it, Karen. You didn't care about the neighborhood. You just wanted power. And now you have none. She glared at me for a solid 5 seconds, her mouth opening and closing like she was about to say something. But she had nothing. Finally, she spun around and stomped off, muttering something about how the whole neighborhood was going to regret this. Yeah, still waiting on that, Karen. After she was officially gone, the neighborhood basically threw a party. Okay, not an actual party, but people were in a ridiculously good mood. One guy put up a sign on his yard that said, Karen Free Zone. Someone baked cookies and left them out at the next HOA meeting with a note that said, oh, it should taste sweet, not bitter. The HOA board even sent out an official letter to all homeowners titled, A New Chapter for Our Community, basically saying, yeah, that was crazy, but we're moving on. Looking back, this whole insane situation taught me a few things. It always can be a nightmare, but only if the wrong people are in charge. A good HOA can actually make a neighborhood better. A bad HOA? Absolute hell. Always read your HOA rules, because some Karens will make up their own. If I hadn't checked the rulebook, Karen would have gotten away with it. Know your rights. Power-hungry people will always try to control others, but they can be stopped. The moment Karen was exposed, she lost everything. Bullies thrive on fear, but once you stand up to them, they crumble. Nothing beats the satisfaction of seeing a corrupt Karen get exactly what she deserves. Seriously, it was glorious. At the end of the day, Karen tried to scam the entire neighborhood, and it completely backfired on her. She lost her power, her position, and even her home. And me? I got to keep my driveway exactly as it was. Moral of the story: if you mess with the wrong homeowner, you might just get exposed in front of the entire neighborhood. And that, my friends, is how Karen's HOA reign of terror came to an epic, well-deserved end. What do you think? Have you ever dealt with an HOA Karen or a power-hungry neighbor like this? Tell me your wildest HOA horror stories in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video to keep the HOA Karens away. Subscribe to Tailflow for more crazy HOA drama and revenge stories. Hit that notification bell so you never miss the next episode of Karen Chaos. Thanks for watching, and remember, if your HOA starts making up rules, make sure to check the rulebook because they might just be full of it. See you in the next one.